enormous respect for each other.
White Gladiator has that big trident spear and the
fires flame during dessert.
Look, the judges are nodding. Even the Egyptian judge is impressed.
Until recently, you claimed that the Earth revolved around the sun.
Welcome to History Bites. I'm Rick Green. Remember when you were 8 years old and you wouldn't finish your dinner and your mom told you, "Don't you know that people are starving in Ireland?" Well, okay, maybe it wasn't Ireland, but in 1847, that's probably what Mom would have said. You see, a terrible blight had wiped out all of Ireland's potato crops. Potatoes. I know that doesn't sound bad, but for the Irish, potatoes weren't just a side dish. For many of them, it was the only food they ate. And when the crops vanished, the Great Potato Famine was on. Of course, these days, you can't have a good famine without television coming along for the ride. So, let's imagine the cameras were rolling back in 1847 when the luck of the Irish ran out.
And for the next 19 hours, we're going to take you on a journey of sorrow and hope as we travel to the dark continent of Ireland, caught in the grips of famine.
There's only one merry jig being danced by these Irish folk, a jig whose name is death.
No one could have foreseen a crisis like this. After all, Ireland already had 20 massive failures of its potato crops in the past century.
Who could have predicted that there'd be a 21st? And you know, Sally, some say this horrible tragedy could have been prevented.
Well, thank goodness it wasn't, or we wouldn't be able to help the Irish today as we approach hour 5 in this very special telethon that we call When Irish Eyes Are Starvin'.
Well, you know the rules, Shauna. We've got 3 lifelines, 50-50, where we tell you that 2 of the answers are pure blarney. There's Ask Our Drunken Audience, where we ask the poor besotted devils around us if they have so much as a clue to their own names, let alone the answer to the question. And then there's Phone Your Meandering Digressive Aunt Edith, where we phone your meandering digressive Aunt Edith. Let's do it then. Let's play Who Wants to Eat So Much as a Tiny, Miserable Scrap of One Bleeding Small Potato? And your question is, how many good Irish souls died last year from the hunger? 1,000 people? 10,000 people? 100,000 people? Or so many hundreds of thousands of people that the coroners have altogether refused to perform any more inquests, besides which most of the coroners are dead of the typhus anyway?
Waiting for our wax to heat up so we can make candles, let's make one of my favorite recipes, Irish potato soup. For that you'll need, well, let's see how our candle wax is doing.
It looks like they've dug the potato out of the hole in the ground and the mayor's about to make his annual announcement.
Ladies and gentlemen, I've just examined the first potato of the season, and I'm sorry to say, it's got the blight. Sorry, folks, it looks like we're in for another 52 weeks of famine.
Well, there you have it. The potato has the blight. And as tradition has it, that means another year of the famine. Well, maybe there'll be better luck next year when Groundhog Day rolls around again.
At the time of the famine, Ireland was still under British rule. Of course, at the time of the famine, India was still under British rule, and the Canadian colonies were still under British rule. And Ceylon, well, anyway, it was up to the British government to respond to the crisis in Ireland. And the Prime Minister, Lord John Russell, did what England had done every time there was a crisis in Ireland. Ignore it.
The Irish Potato Famine has entered its 3rd year. Lord John Russell, as Prime Minister of England, what are your plans?
We see this whole thing as an internal Irish problem, and we'd really like to keep it that way. The Irish landlords should be feeding their farmers with the money they receive in rents.
But if the farmers don't have any crops, they can't pay their rent.
Oh, right. Well, the thing is, Larry, I favor a laissez-faire approach to economics. Just sit back and things will sort themselves out.
Yes, you call it Russelnomics. As long as there's plenty to eat in England, there'll be a trickle-down effect to the poor people in Ireland.
Precisely. In fact, if anyone wants to do their bit for Ireland, I suggest they dine very heartily tonight.
Now blight has wiped out the potato crops and left them with nothing to eat at all, except stew. The sorry stew of squalor and starvation. I know what you're thinking. What silly, silly Irish folk, putting all their spuds in one basket. But haven't we all done something foolish before? Don't we all make mistakes? There's a little bit of Irish in all of us, but there's a lot of Irish in the Irish. Please, pick up your telegraph and tap. Pledge your potatoes.
Now, I don't want to get off on a rant here, but people in Ireland are so hungry right now, they make Ichabod Crane look like freaking Falstaff. The way these Irish are starving, you'd swear they're going to start modeling clothes for the Gap. And what are the English doing about it in their imperial wisdom? They're putting the landlords in charge of making sure the tenant farmers have enough to eat. Now, maybe it's just me, but making the landlords responsible for the welfare of their tenants is like putting Captain Ahab in charge of marine land.
300,000 Irish starved to death last year.
And let's not forget that the number of starving Irish people actually decreased last year by...
Yes, 300,000. Yeah.
Clearly, we're in a time of transition, or attrition. I always get those two confused. But the point is, what we're seeing is a natural market shift.
Oh, market shift. So by market, you mean thousands of Irish people, and by shift, you mean die a horrible and protracted death.
That's Russellnomics.
So, Dick, you're here because you care, and not to promote your new opera, Tannhauser, which is opening this week.
Naturally, Sally. How can I even think about my new hit play, which will be running through till March at the Dresden Opera House, when these poor people are hungry for food? Who cares about a romantic, tragic opera, about a wandering poet involved in love, magic, swordplay, danger, and singing, with good tickets still available, while the good people of Iceland are starving?
Ireland.
What?
You said Iceland.
Iceland, Ireland, yeah, whatever. That is not important. If they are starving in Iceland, let us send them potatoes too, right?
I think Iceland's doing fine, actually, Richard.
I do not care! Iceland, Ireland, Greenland, so long as nobody is starving in Deutschland. The youth of Germany must be strong.
Just give some real food to the Irish and give it fast, because if we don't feed them, the Irish are going to come looking for food, and we're going to be the first stop, all right? I mean, I'm as liberal as the next guy, but I hate immigrants.
Send your potatoes to the fatherland. We will not waste them. Unlike certain people in the financial community, if you know what I mean.
Thank you, Richard. Folks, make that call.
While the candle wax is cooling, let's bake up one of my mother's recipes for a delicious potato pie with potato salad. Start with some fresh from the ground.
I promised myself if I made it to this percentage of a potato, I'd stop, but I'm just not sure. I believe I'm going to have to be phoning my meandering, digressive Aunt Edith. She lives in Limerick.
All right, we'll get our friends at AT&T to call her up. Are you there, Aunt Edith?
Sure, and I'm hearing you, Mr. O'Philbin. And I must say that this question reminds me of the winter of 1835. And let me assure you, there wasn't a more difficult crop than the one we had that year. I said at the time, and may the devil take me at the crossroads if I'm not
Aunt Edith, I have to interrupt you there to remind you that you only have 25 minutes left to answer.
Oh, very obliged I am to you, Mr. O'Philbin, very obliged. Now, as I was saying, ever since I was a lass of 7, I had what you might call a penchant.
When we return, how do you spell famine relief? England's policy towards the Irish famine of the mid-1800s was basically, let them eat chips. In other words, not our problem. But even so, once enough people started dying, there was some official famine relief. This raised a new dilemma for the starving Irish. Not just whether they could survive the famine, could they survive the relief?
Hour number 5 of our telethon. And whether you pledge 1 bushel, 2 bushels, or just a single tuber, the key is to call and save the Irish. Bring a spuddy smile to the Emerald Isle. I'm joined now by Anthony Peters, president of the Save an Irish Peasant Foundation.
Hello, Sally.
Anthony, I know that sometimes good-hearted people like our viewers feel wary about donating their hard-earned potatoes in case it goes to people who don't really need it. Is that happening here?
Absolutely not, Sally. We only give food to the genuinely destitute. In fact, anyone who owns more than a quarter acre of land isn't allowed to receive public relief.
Is it working?
Is it working? You bet. Why, all across Ireland, destitute people are actually giving away their land just so they can become officially destitute.
That's wonderful.
It's always the same. There's always someone starving somewhere in the world. One group was starving in 1845, one group was starving in 1846. Now it's the Irish. I mean, you just can't go on caring in the same way.
But it was the Irish who were starving in 1845 and 1846.
Well, there you are then. Same old, same old.
Dreadful, absolutely.
It's so sad, those poor people.
Now, should our Prime Minister be spending more money on relief for the Irish?
Oh, not our money, no.
Oh, no, not at all. No, no.
It's so sad, those poor people.
Oh, yes. I feel for them. Somebody should do something somewhere.
Nobody wants to see potatoes going to couch potatoes. Oh, couch potatoes. That's why we make the starving peasants work for everything we give them.
Now, this isn't some kind of token work.
No, Sally. This is the real Maguire, or the real O'Guire. We make these starving people spend the day hacking large stones into smaller stones for no good reason.
Now, there's still growing food in Ireland, such as grain and corn, but this food is being exported to England.
Yes, of course.
There are people starving in Ireland,
Yes.
and you're taking food out of Ireland instead of feeding it to the starving people.
Oh, I see, Larry. Yes, well, they're two completely unrelated issues, aren't they? I mean, the Irish aren't starving from not eating grain and corn. They're starving from not eating potatoes. Grain and corn don't even enter into it.
But let's face it, Lord Russell, if you gave them that food, lives could be saved.
Larry, if we were just going to turn around and give that grain to some other group of starving people, I'd be the first one to agree with you. Certainly, let's just leave it with the Irish. But this grain is expensive stuff to produce. We can't just give it away to the first starving ethnicity that comes along.
Even if it happens to be their country?
Exactly. If the Irish want our Irish grain, then they should just pay for it like anyone else. That's only fair. Pay for it with the money they make selling potatoes.
I know you're saying, well, life is hard for everyone. I mean, almost everyone is hungry these days. So few of us have clean water. Then there's smallpox, diphtheria,
Scarlet fever, polio, the bubonic plagues.
cholera, typhus.
Typhoid is another one.
Oh, pneumonia, rheumatic fever, beriberi, scurvy,
brain
rickets.
fever, syphilis,
Oh, women's
consumption.
complaints.
What can you do? What can you do?
No, but somebody should.
Somebody should
Do you have any money to help?
We have money. Oh, we have
of course,
loads
of course.
of money.
We just wish they did. We wish they did, don't we?
If they had
Even in the upper classes, a quarter of the babies don't make it to their first birth.
A quarter.
So you're probably asking, Sally, when we have problems like these ourselves, why should I give anything to the Irish? And of course the answer is because the Irish famine is having a telethon.
Right.
And let the candles cool off. Then we can put them in our candlestick holder and they'll be ready for use when we need them. Now, let's prepare a breakfast that's fun and filling. Potato pancakes. Start with fresh.
Donors is the author Emily Bronte. Recently, we sent Emily to Ireland to visit the peasant she sponsored. It was an experience she'll never forget, no matter how hard she tries.
Hello, I'm Emily Bronte, author of Wuthering Heights. In my novel, Heathcliff and Catherine are wild, stormy characters who never know what form their love will take. never know where their passions will lead them. But one thing they always know is where their next meal is coming from. Well, for Irish peasants like Murphy here, that just isn't so. There's only one law for people like Murphy. If anything can go wrong, it will. I understand your wife passed away, is that right?
Essentially, yes. She became a Protestant.
I'm so sorry. But still, even if love cannot blossom, something must grow in this land. This good Irish soil, these rolling hills, that verdant heath, these moors where passionate lovers meet by moonlight.
Now this heap of dirt's good for nothing.
How awful.
All right, Murphy. I'm evicting you as of immediately. Get your arse into gear.
What the government said you are responsible for the well-being of your tenants.
Oh, I know, Murphy. That's why I'm evicting you. So you can be
While I was there,
for your own bloody
Murphy
well-being.
got a visit from his landlord.
And what are you looking at?
It's just like in my novel. He's Heathcliff, you're Catherine. No, wait, which is the one that dies?
Oh, Jesus.
No, that's the Bible. Please, help make their life just a little less mothering.
Why are we staging this telethon? Why are so many great former celebrities and great almost celebrities here? Why have their agents convinced them to make an appearance? Why do they speak the heartbreaking words that we've written for them? Because it's important.
Won't you please sponsor an Irish peasant?
Get them on those ships to America.
Let them be unwelcome, hungry, and useless somewhere else.
And provide them with that crucial change of scenery so essential in overlooking their unwelcomeness, hunger, and uselessness.
You can't end the problem of the Irish potato famine, but by sending the Irish away, you can make it someone else's problem.
I am not a leprechaun or a Celtic singer, and I don't live in a hut. Ever since I was evicted last week. And I don't know Donald or Paddy or Kathleen, although I'm sure they're very, very dead by now. I don't speak Gaelic. I speak English with a funny accent. I don't have a president or a prime minister, except somewhere in bloody England. I believe in wakes, not funerals, limericks, not sonnets, and that the potato is a backstabbing and altogether unreliable vegetable. Ireland has the second largest death rate. 'Tis the first nation of starvation and is the best part of Great Britain after England, Scotland, and Wales. My name is Ryan, and I am an Irishman! Until I emigrate next week. Then I'll be an American!
Over 1 million people emigrated from Ireland during the famine. Some came to Canada, most went to America. The problem was getting there. Most of the ships crossing the Atlantic were overcrowded and undersupplied. Thousands died on board from disease and starvation. People called them the coffin ships and the plague boats. And today folks complain if the airline food isn't up to scratch.
And did you know, for the Irish who are fleeing to America, they only have a 1 in 6 chance of dying on the voyage. That's a lot better than the 1 in 5 chance they have of starving if they stay in Ireland.
Yes. Plus, they get a lovely burial at sea.
Of course, it gives off a wonderful, warm light. And best of all, if you have no potatoes, wax candles make a delicious emergency snack. Anything edible. It's a good thing.
Over 1 million people in Ireland dead of starvation and disease. Over 1 million people emigrated. If you had to do it all over again, what would you change?
Well, I suppose I'd see if there was some way we could take out the Welsh while we were at it.
With the support we gave him, Murphy was able to buy a passage on a ship to America. I have a letter from him here.
Oh, no.
Thank you for sponsoring me, Miss Bronte. After crossing the Atlantic, I had to convince the customs officers at Ellis Island not to dump me into a mass grave on the grounds that I was technically not dead. America has been a wee disappointment. Firstly, the streets aren't paved with gold. Secondly, the streets aren't paved. Thirdly, apparently they're expecting me to pave them. Signed, Murphy. P.S. I finally read your book, and I felt that the narrative extends past the natural ending and the metaphorical structure is weak in terms of your grasp of rhetoric, florid, derivative, contrived. He's alive anyway.
Let's see what's in the news. The skeptics thought Ben Franklin's experiments were bizarre. Not just for trying to touch lightning, but for employing naked midgets to pull his string. Gerald could never understand why his wife refused to paint his portrait until he happened to catch his reflection in a mirror. 5 was simply too many. Little Millie bade her farewell after drawing the short straw and went quietly away.
Just listen to what these other sponsors have to say.
Oh, you hear about how they're starving and how sad it is, and how the potatoes were destroyed by the Phytophthora infestans blight, and how the self-interested agenda of the conservative ruling class has prevented a fair distribution of food, and how this suggests a need to reform the system of tenancies and agricultural practices in general. But it's only when you see sad faces that you really understand the issues.
You could be our next magic telegraph call. Say no to starvation and say yes to feeling good about helping one single person while ignoring the broad social issues that made this a crisis in the first place.
The famine lasted for another 2 years. By the time it was over, the Irish had finally abandoned their love affair with the potato, and they'd started to raise sheep and cattle. And they showed the world the danger of a society that depended too heavily on one crop. But one Irish tradition that didn't disappear was the tradition of emigration. Even when the famine ended, people kept leaving the Emerald Isle. By the time the 20th century began, there were as many Irish people in other countries as there were in Ireland. But for the 1 million people who died during the famine, it was too late to leave. Because when you haven't got a bite to eat, history bites.
Little Timothy swore that Mom loved the others more. In order to relax his blushing bride, Lord Byron first demonstrated his technique on a chair. The Duke of Prussia agreed to be this year's poster boy for the fight against inbreeding. Young MacDougall thought he had won the duel till he noticed Betty was holding something of his. Hold it, shouted the commander. I believe this man is hurt. Gretchen rallied the regiment by shouting, "Follow these!"